This is an episode that I've been dreading for a long time. We're going to be talking about G.I. Joe in the 1990s, so stick around. Hello and welcome to Days of Dorker Past. My name's Rob, and in this episode, yes, we're going to talk about G.I. Joe in the 1990s. We're going to take a look at some of the awesome accessories that came with the action figures, specifically the figures that were released in 1990. Let me back up a minute and say, any G.I. Joe is good G.I. Joe, but the 1990s, it just wasn't my favorite time period. Now, every wave of G.I. Joe is somebody's first G.I. Joe. And I respect that. And I respect that the 1990 Joes have fans. And that's awesome. But like I said, it just wasn't my cup of tea. But like I said, any G.I. Joe is good G.I. Joe. So it all deserves to be talked about. Now, the criteria of my picks for some of the most awesome accessories are simply just that. We're taking a look at the guns, the helmets, the backpacks, whatever the action figures came with. Some of my picks have a very small, little trivial item that I think is awesome, while some of them had a whole plethora of really awesome gear. Now, the last time that I talked about G.I. Joe and their awesome accessories was back in May of 2019, and I covered the year 1989. I'm going to put that and the other years that I covered down in the description below. So, without further ado, let's jump into the list. Number 1 on the list is Ambush. Now, Ambush was a concealment specialist. He came with a grenade launcher, a rifle, a really sweet vintage, like World War II style helmet, but the biggest thing that he came with was a real fabric bedroll and tent. The tent could be set up with like a 4-piece like lean-to assembly that, I mean, that's awesome. It's gear like that that helps really flesh out this toy line and the world that they live in. I would have loved to see this accessory with some past figures, some future figures. I mean, it was just neat. I mean, kind of before that, the only real tent that we had was the plastic bivouac that they came out with many years before this. So this was a neat accessory that they should have done a lot more with. Now, number 2 on the list is Intervention Specialist Bullhorn. His original prototype file card said that he was a hostage negotiator or a crisis specialist. His biggest feature, which adds to the hyper-realism of G.I. Joe, was a giant bullhorn. I guess so he could communicate with people that were barricaded inside of a building. With Cobra officers that were hunkered down somewhere, he could try to negotiate with them. Now, the bullhorn was very well made and pretty cool, but it was his other features and accessories that made him awesome. First off, the figure itself is pretty sweet with his decked out face camouflage and olive drab and brown clothing. But what really made him sweet, he had a face mask, like gas mask, that would go over his head that actually had a clear part here and, had the canisters on the side. That was pretty cool. Next, he came with a very large sniper rifle with a huge scope. That was pretty cool. But the coolest thing, he actually had a collapsible rifle that fit in a backpack that he could wear. That is awesome. And that harkens back to Destro with his awesome M14 or whatever that was broken down in his backpack that you, of course, couldn't take out back in the day. But now they finally remedied that all the way into 1990. Number 3 on the list is Jungle Assault Specialist Pathfinder. Now, okay, like I've said before, hyper-realism. He had a backpack that came with 2 machine guns that attached to it. I guess so he could keep his hands free to use the most awesome accessory he came with, a weed whacker. Yes, folks, a weed whacker, except this one had a gnarly blade on it that could cut through Cobra soldiers as well as it could weeds. It's just a neat little thing that, like I said, adds to the hyper-realism of G.I. Joe. Because I would love to have been in that production meeting where they're talking about it, where, hey, we need to punch this up a bit. Give me a character idea. What about a jungle guy? We've done that. What about a jungle guy with a weed whacker? Hey, I think you may have something there. Either way, as silly or as creative as you want to think it is, it's awesome. It's just an awesome weapon that, he could double as a serial killer in a slasher film. So, that's cool. Number 4 on the list is Rampart. And he had the specialty of being a coastal defender. What Rampart came with that really set him apart from some of the other figures was an awesome, huge machine gun. But what was really neat, he came with a missile launcher that it looks down and dirty, just a huge tube that huge missiles could be put into it that you got to do. He came with 2 huge missiles, by the way, and it's just simplistic and awesome. It is a weapon that you could actually see take out a ship that's a little bit off the shoreline. You could see him taking care of some eels and stuff that are swimming in, just ba-boom! Pretty sweet. Number 5 on the list is Mr. Right of Might himself, Salvo. Everything about this figure is pretty awesome. From his bald head to his briefcase and everything in between. And what's in between? A huge honking mine launcher that came with 5 individual mines. This thing looks like a huge rail gun, and just the thought of shooting mines, that's slightly disturbing, but very cool. The other huge accessory that he came with was a missile launcher. And I'm talking straight out of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Commando type of missile launcher. A big square box that just rains death upon Cobra. Well, since it's a kinder, gentler G.I. Joe, just rain mild bodily harm onto Cobra. Yeah, that's it. Number 6 on the list is the medical specialist of the future, Stretcher. Now, they probably could have honestly called this dude Doc version 2, but they went with a whole new character because this is a whole new type of medic. He came with a flying platform, very sci-fi futuristic, where he could stand and go across the battlefield looking for injured people to help out. He came with a small, odd-looking handgun and different hoses and straps and accoutrement for his flying platform. So, pretty much the most awesome thing about him is this platform. I mean, it really adds a deep sci-fi spin to G.I. Joe. I mean, some of the vehicles and stuff have definitely done that, but to just have like a 0G flying platform going across the battlefield, that's pretty sweet. Number 7 is Sub-Zero, and not that Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, which we would see a few years later in action figure form. No, this is Winter Operations Specialist Sub-Zero. Now, between this list and the past lists, I'm just a sucker for missiles. Give me all the missiles. It just makes it more fleshed out, realistic figure. And Sub-Zero came with 4 of them that went into a small white mortar that he had. On top of that, he came with snowshoes, a huge machine gun that came with a bipod and an ammo belt, and he came with an awesome backpack. I love the fact that throughout the entire toy line, all of the winter or Arctic troops, G.I. Joe and Cobra, come with a ton of accessories. That's why the Arctic troops will always be some of my favorites. Now, before we dive into the Cobra entries in this list, I want to talk about an honorable or unhonorable mention, and that is Captain Gridiron. He is labeled as a hand-to-hand specialist, yet he comes with football grenades, missile launcher, and a machine gun. The only real hand-to-hand thing that he came with are blocking pads. Yeah, blocking pads. We get it, dude. You were a football player. You love football, but to say he's a hand-to-hand specialist is really reaching. Why would you need to be good at hand-to-hand if you can chuck grenades and fire missiles at people, or gun everybody down with a machine gun? So, I'm adding him to the list because he came with some really unique items, and a lot of them, but yeah, this is one that, yeah, that's just right on the line for me. Okay, number 8 on the list, we dive into Cobra, and that is the Laser Viper. He takes a lot of inspiration from the Astro Viper with his huge helmet and backpack with blasters on it. In this case, they're lasers, kinda like the Astro Viper that had lasers coming off of his backpack. This time though, they're a little bit bigger. He has a really neat color scheme, but I'm just a sucker for the large helmet. I think it's neat, and it just gives the character a lot of personality. Next on the list is Range Viper. Now this is a pretty popular figure. Me personally, I never really liked the design of it. But he comes with a really neat accessory, and that is his machine gun with removable drum. I just think that is a really neat feature, that the drum could actually move on the machine gun. He also came with a pretty sweet knife and a missile launcher with a mortar that could go in it. He also came with a huge backpack. But he's going on the list because I really dig that machine gun. Next on the list is Undertow. What is there not to like about this character? Like with Arctic Joes and Cobras, I really dig Aquatic Joes and Cobras because they come with so much gear. Everything from their flippers to their underwater weaponry. Undertow came with a really neat oxygen mask setup, his flippers of course, an awesome trident. That's a really unique weapon in modern warfare. That's very cool. He also came with a barracuda. I'm always a fan of any figure that comes with an animal. But on top of that, he comes with a skiff. Now this is something that you could use with any of your figures. A Joe figure drops in the water, he grabs a skiff and goes to town. I mean, it's just a really neat accessory that can be used with anything. Kind of like the trident. I'd like to give that to Storm Shadow or Snake Eyes, like in that one episode. Next on the list is the Rock Viper. It took a while for Cobra to come around to having a mountain trooper. I mean, Alpine's been kicking it for a while in G.I. Joe, so it took this many years for Cobra to come around? First off, and very unrealistically, this figure comes with a rifle that is as big as he is. Why would you have that if you're climbing a mountain? I would think lighter is better and having free hands to climb, but I'm no expert. Anyway, on top of this huge machine gun, he also comes with one of those bolt guns that, helps put the bolts in the rock to, you lash your ropes to and stuff. I'm sure it has a technical name, but like I said, I'm no expert. You had that and a grappling hook and backpack. I mean, very awesome. Any figure that came with ropes and grappling hooks, always a bonus. Now, our last entry on the list at number 12 is the Sall Viper. Now, Sall stands for Semi-Automatic Weapon. The name really doesn't fit because this dude also comes with a machine gun that is as big as he is. Just looking at this thing, it does not say semi-auto to me. This says full auto, wipe out an entire building full of people. He also came with an ammo belt, a bipod, and a backpack. This was just a quick list of 12 of the greatest G.I. Joe action figure accessories of 1990. Now, of course, there's a very popular figure that I just kind of jumped over because I personally don't like his accessories, and that is Night Creeper. Of course, now that I mention him, I gotta talk about him, but just know I don't want to. Night Creeper came with a huge crossbow. He also came with 2 swords, and this is where I ain't liking it. The wavy sword's pretty cool, but this branched sword reminds me of something from a video game I played on the NES back in the day. I think it was called Demon Sword, where the more you leveled up, the more branches came onto your sword. In that game, it was pretty cool, but for G.I. Joe, I don't think so. There's a huge disconnect between me and the later ninjas that were released in the G.I. Joe line. I mean, ninjas should be very simplistic, and the ninjas that came out of Hasbro weren't. So, just a spoiler, in future episodes, a lot of the ninjas, especially Ninja Force, will not make the list. Sorry to disappoint. I also want to add that this was the year that the Sonic Fighters came out, and these were Joes that had backpacks that made awesome sound effects. Pretty cool, but they were all pretty much the same, and they were just repaints of previous figures. Now, I was a sucker for that. I didn't buy any of the Joe Sonic Fighters, but I loved the Marvel superheroes that came with them. That was really cool to me, especially like the Venom one that you push the button, he's like, I'll eat your brain, I'll eat your brain. I mean, that's classic. Anyway, sorry to jump off track there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Like I said, it's just a quick look back at 1990s G.I. Joe action figure accessories. And if you did like this episode, please give me a thumbs up. If you got something to say, please leave a comment. I love reading them, and I love getting back to everybody. And if you're new around here and you enjoyed this, or any of the episodes that YouTube are recommending down there, hit subscribe. And if you hit that little bell icon, you will be notified whenever there's a new episode. So, until next time, keep being rad and stay dorky.